Okay, well, as we get everyone settled in here, I'm just going to say a few things. We're just doing our Facebook live stream here. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming in today. This is How To From Home number 5, and it's kind of cheating. I think most of us, maybe not you, Matthew, but this is How To From Home at our offices. So I do apologize. We'll have to rebrand the sessions here, but definitely feels like things are getting back to a new, or whatever the new normal is. But again, it's been a great few weeks, obviously with these ongoing, and for me at UNDC, it's been great to see the community come around and participate, ask questions, and it's been really great to see the different industry members and panelists come through. And yeah, honestly, this has been a huge success. And normally we have our ongoing How To series, which happens in person, but these are challenging times, and it's been awesome to find new avenues to communicate and educate our music community. So thanks again for coming here. So yeah, this is How To number 5, from home at the office. And like I said, the real DNA of this ongoing forum is providing meaningful discussions and skill building to help all music creators, professionals, not only face the challenging times that we're faced with now, but more importantly, gain knowledge and strengthen skills for lifelong careers. So again, if you're here, if you've been tuning in the past month, again, thank you. I'm Jimmy, so I'm from Music BC. Today we're diving into a bit of a masterclass on online music collaboration. Our panelists will be discussing some of the more current cloud-based platforms, including Splice, Ableton and Loopcloud. And this is a relatively new innovation, but it's going to be great to hear Matthew, Jonathan, and Dan talk about how this is changing the creative process and really opening up and giving access to really quality music creation all online. So it's going to be a good topic, I think also very relevant for the times we're facing now. Again, I'd like to thank our funders at Creative BC, the province of BC, Factor, and the government of Canada. They've been instrumental in helping make this possible. A few housekeeping items started. If this is your first time on Zoom, again, welcome. At the top of your screen, you'll see a Q&A tab. That's gonna be the best place for you throughout this discussion to post questions and feedback. I'll be keeping track of that throughout the call. And we'll have a short Q&A period at the end of the discussion as well. So definitely throw those questions up to us and the panelists. If you're on Facebook Live, definitely thank you for tuning in there. That won't apply to you, but we will be monitoring the comments there. So feel free to engage with the content, ask questions for the panelists as well. And we'll do our best to get to all of those throughout the call. Any we don't get, keep an eye on the Facebook event page. Posting answers and more kind of summaries from today's topic there. Yeah, so today is about cloud collaboration. So I'm very happy to welcome back Dan Turcotte as our moderator. Hi, Dan. Dan is the commercial director at Monstercat. He's also a member of the Music BC Board of Directors. And he's been, like with me, very instrumental in making this whole series happen. So again, Dan, great to have you, and thanks again. Alongside Dan, we'll have Jonathan Winter. Hey, John.
Hey.
He oversees the music direction also at Monstercat. He's the director of A&R, and he's been playing an essential role in the label since 2011, so since the beginning of Monstercat. He's also an artist in his own right, and notably he's released music under the alias Going Quantum. He can tell you more about that. And as well, we've got Dr. Matthew T Shelvock. So he's a teacher at Western University. He's the business affairs manager at Chillhop, and rarely can I say this in honesty, but he literally wrote the book on today's topic. It's called Cloud-Based Music Production, released in 2020. And it explores the creative impacts of cloud-based music production services on the act of creation. So again, this is going to be a really innovative and very deep dive conversation. So we're in very, very good hands. That's all for me. Again, I'll see you guys at the end for question period. Yeah, take it away, Dan. Thanks,
awesome. Thanks, Jimmy. Great introduction. And hello to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It's a little funny. We're doing How To From Home, and both John and I are in the office, but
we're distanced.
We're distanced. We're in 2 separate rooms, so I think that's all right.
I'm at home.
Matt's at home. So like Jimmy said, we're going to be talking about cloud-based collaboration today. So in a nutshell, we're talking about strategies for how people are collaborating in an online environment. I think it's topical right now with so many musicians not being able to go into the studio and work in person, record in the studio. But I think even beyond that, both John and Matt are going to be able to provide some good clarity on how this has been working for the past couple of years. Both John and Matt have been working in the music industry for years, and cloud-based collaboration is not a new topic. I think it's just something that is, very current. So before we move on, I'd like to give both you guys an opportunity to just introduce yourselves a little bit. I know Jimmy gave kind of a cursory intro there, but Matt, maybe you could kick us off and just tell us who you are, a little bit about your history, and anything else we should know about you before we start off.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Dan. I sort of began on the entirely different end of the spectrum. I was a creative earlier in my life. In another life, it feels like now, kind of began as a session player, migrated to being a sort of mastering engineer for 6 or 7 years, and then finally landed up in the biz affairs world. But I also write and do research. So my latest book came out in March on the cloud-based music production topic. And yeah, it's just sort of on what we're talking about today. What is it for? What does it do? How to make music in this realm also, and how that might actually potentially be different from some other modalities that exist.
Mm-hmm. And just making sure that everybody's aware. So Matt's working at Chillhop right now, as well as teaching at Western. But before that, you were working in dance music, right?
Yes, absolutely. I had the pleasure of working at both Heroic Management and Bitbird Records in a similar capacity to what I do now, which gave me a really great view, actually, of how some of these tools are also used in that genre, as well as the genre that I currently work within, which is more lo-fi, jazzy, sort of hip-hop beats and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited to have your perspective on this. And I think it's going to be great to hear from somebody with an academic lens, but also somebody who's worked in both dance music and in more hip hop, lo-fi area. So thanks for being here. John, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I also come from a very different world. I was planning to be a computer programmer up until, end of college, and just kind of found myself in the middle of the music scene. I really liked listening to music, DJing, and wanted to get into production. And through that, and through the internet with like YouTube and Facebook and all that, I met a like-minded group of people who then went on to create Monstercat. And so I was able to be a part of the early beginnings of Monstercat and learn a lot alongside the rest of the team, just everything from, music rights to the whole process of like how music is created, how it's signed, how to market it, all of that kind of stuff. But over the years, my role in the company has really kind of shifted towards just the A&Ring and actual kind of music side of the company, rather than all the marketing and all that kind of stuff that a really small label would have to do with a really small team. So yeah, I've been working really close with artists. Used to be the only A&R. Now we've got a nice team of A&Rs that I work really closely with. And I hope to share some of my experiences with you guys and talk about some of the cool technologies that I've noticed come up with online collaboration.
Absolutely. Well, John, thanks for being here. Really excited to hear your perspective, because not only are you working with artists as an A&R at Monstercat, and you've been here since the beginning, but you're also an artist yourself. And I think the Going Quantum project, there's been quite a little collaboration. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, guys. So I want to kick it off, and I want to first off, let's talk about what is cloud-based collaboration. What are the sorts of tools that people are using right now? So Matt, I know you've recently published a book on this. Can you give us a cursory overview of what sort of tools are available and what people are using to collaborate online?
Absolutely, my pleasure. So there are certainly different sort of levels and layers to this, but I think for the most part, a lot of us, when we refer to cloud-based collaboration and cloud-based music production, what we're usually talking about is some sort of remote storage where samples and presets and sort of other perhaps musical ideas, such as like MIDI data and that kind of thing, are all sort of located in a central place and tagged and ready for people to use and incorporate within their own music, whatever that means for you. So that could be somebody who's great at sort of chopping samples and using those in your productions. That could be somebody who's a more synthesizer-based producer using presets and things like, Serum and Massive and Silent or FM8 or whatever it may be. And all of these sort of samples and patches, perhaps MIDI data as well, is all sort of retrievable from a centralized sound database. I think that's one of the most prominent uses right now, and the one that really changed things the most for those who are making music.
Mm-hmm. And so is there a particular product or marketplace that you think has really kind of pushed this along? I think the one that comes to mind for me is Splice. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit. I mean, how do you think Splice has changed the marketplace?
Absolutely. Just before we dive into Splice, I suppose there's also Loopcloud and Noise and other sort of perhaps like less formal libraries as well. But those are two honorable mentions there as well that are really sort of pushing the game forward, I think, in terms of cloud-based collaboration and sound retrieval and that type of thing. Splice in particular, though, last I checked, had sort of 1 or 2 million users actively engaging in this product and doing just that, retrieving sound, samples, presets, and that kind of thing. And one of the ways, although there's several, I think one of the ways this has really changed things is in the past, a lot of these people who produced, for example, royalty-free samples, many of them have been around for many years. For example, like Loop Masters, who eventually, created Loopcloud and that kind of thing. You used to have to kind of go everywhere, and it was sort of a big challenge. And who was working with what samples, and it almost had an effect, sort of like crate digging in a sense. In hip hop, where you kind of go through old records looking for unique and different sounds. However, when you do that kind of thing in hip hop or electronic music, that's really not illegal. Sorry, it's not legal, excuse me. It's not allowed. So in order to provide a sort of better solution, people have been making royalty-free loops for a long time. And then by aggregating all of these in one source, like Splice works with, for example, hundreds of different loop creators. It's really, really streamlined the process of sound selection and sort of like, in my view, it has a sort of pedagogical element too. Like you can learn to be a much better producer by sort of seeing the overview of how all of these fantastic sound creators, like Big Fish Audio and Capson and all of these people, when you see sort of how producers they are creating sound, it, for me at least, and I know many others, it sort of gives you a lens on how to do better. It gives you a sense of how you can curate your own work better because you're getting some really, really high quality stuff and it's all located together. So I don't have to spend hours of my production time, kind of jumping between different websites and different catalogs and different magazines. It used to be very popular to get your samples from sort of magazines in the stone age of CDs and that kind of thing. So those are a few benefits that spring immediately to mind.
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons I used to subscribe to Future Music, so I could get the CD with all of the samples on it. I kind of miss
that's our era. That's our era, Dan. That's when we met.
Yeah, exactly. I miss those days. It's something about having the CD and having those magazines on the shelf. John, what are you thinking? I mean, we've talked about Splice. Is there anything else?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to touch on Splice real quick, I think what it's done for producers is incredible. Because I mean, at least with my, friend circle, the artists that I know, like when you're just starting out, it was very, very common for people to pirate samples. Everyone would go for the Vengeance, the Central Club sounds. Like that's where you get your, electro kicks and snares and all that. And I don't think there were very many people, at least young producers, that were actually buying or paying royalties for their samples. And what Splice has done with their subscription model has made it really easy to go in and kind of pick and choose how you want to use your credits. And if you don't use your credits for a month, they roll over to the next month. It's just been a really great way to actually get people to pay for samples, I feel. I don't know if it's the same in your world, but I've just noticed that like most people that I talk to actually have a Splice account now, and I haven't talked to them too much about, other avenues. Like I'm sure these other places are great as well, and I should probably check them out. Because yeah, everybody using the same pool of samples can get kind of repetitive. You can pick out little samples here and there from demos. You're like, oh, I've heard that vocal or something in another track. So it is good to check out the competition. But I just think that the way that they've monetized it is great. I know that a couple of our artists have also done packs for Splice, and they pay like a pretty nice chunk of money for that. And I know it's a lot of work to put together, a nice pack of samples, loops, one shots, presets, all that kind of stuff. But it's a nice way for artists to to create these packs and have like a nice little boost of income so that they can have music be their full-time job.
No, I think you make a really good point, which is they've created a marketplace so people are paying for convenience in the same way that I don't torrent any TV shows because I have Netflix. Why would I, right? It's easy to pay $10. But they've created a revenue stream for artists, which I think is fantastic, and they've done a really good job of that. But I think the other thing that's really interesting about Splice is like you were mentioning, because there's a limited pool of samples that exist there, we're starting to realize that the pros are doing the same thing I am. Right? You can turn on a radio record and sometimes you can pick out Splice samples. You can hear them. There's tons of
you can turn on the radio and you hear a guitar riff. You're like, I just played that sample last night when I was digging through guitar samples.
That was the one I was thinking of.
Yep.
It's a very famous one. But I think that's great. And I think that's this theme of, the pros are doing the same thing I have, and they have the ability to work with the same tools that I am. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit. So we've talked about Splice as a product, but let's take it one step above that and let's talk about collaboration. So I am an artist and I'm a part of a duo, and I'm working on a project file within my computer, and now I want to work with somebody on, who's living in Belgium. How can I do that? Do you guys have any experience doing those sorts of things?
Matt, you want to talk on this first?
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, absolutely. I think Splice in particular is really sort of innovated and led the game here through their community collaborations. And those sort of take different forms as well. I see, for example, they run a lot of contests. I kind of see that as an inherent form of collaboration in a sense. It might not, or although it might not lead to a record release or something like that, but it's definitely a form of collaborative spirit. But then more directly, what you have is the ability to upload session files, and then also determine, okay, like what plugins are used here so that somebody else has the chance to perhaps go and get that Key Waves plugin that gives you a nice warbly vinyl sound or something like that you're using. Something that may happen in my world, but that's one way is simply providing that space and that storage in a streamlined way for the session file to be there, the details to be there, and then people can see, oh, is this something I want to collaborate on or not? Do I have the tools or not? For example, maybe I use FL9 and somebody else is on Ableton 10. Well, I can see the differences in the session file. And in some cases, you could even share stems and all that type of thing as well, which for those who don't know would be sort of individual audio versions of anything that is in your project, so others can collaborate.
Mm-hmm. So you're telling me that they have this, they have the ability to share a session file, which is essentially just a project file that I export from my DAW, my digital audio workstation, and I can upload that into Splice, and then somebody can go on and they can see it. And if they have all the same tools, all the same plugins and the same software, they can download it and collaborate it.
Exactly. And perhaps they don't have a certain plugin, they can go get it. Waves, for example, is super flexible about this. You don't have to buy the big multi-$1,000 pack. You can just buy one plugin from them if you need it to get a project done. And that's often a more responsible way of, I think, adding tools to your toolkit as opposed to buying gigantic groups of tools all at once. Particularly for those who are just beginning, or perhaps your mid to late career and you're looking for new sounds. Well, this is a great way of jumping in, seeing what other people are doing, and then potentially getting in that same lane. If you could easily notice, for example, perhaps there is one plugin that comes up over and over and over again in productions you like. That's something you can take note of as a producer and move forward in your own work that way.
Mm-hmm. And how does that contrast against what's available within the software? You know, I'm an Ableton user, so I think I can zip my session file and I could send it to John. Why is it better to do it online through something like Splice?
That's a really great question, because you're totally right. You know, we've had tools like Dropbox and Google Drive going strong for a long time, which are also cloud-based tools for file storage. But where Splice improves upon this is that they organize and tag and streamline it. And they provide a really nice interface that's very easy to use in the process. So you don't have to, for example, get somebody's session files and just to find out that they have a slightly different version of the same software as you. You know, somebody's on 9.4 and you're on 9.6 or something like that. Yeah. Well, it will codify all those details and present them, so you can quickly sort of troubleshoot and get through it fast. Because I know that relying on Dropbox and Drive, you know, Dan, we've collaborated on things before. How much did we finish on Dropbox? Absolutely nothing, you know, but Splice, I think, presents an opportunity to do that in a more effective and efficient way.
Yeah, it's definitely way more specialized and much nicer to look at, for sure. I actually, this is kind of silly, but I have a laptop that I use here at the office and then a desktop computer at home. So I actually use Splice just to keep a backup of my project files so that I can open them on either computer without having to like hook up my laptop to the external monitor. And my computer at home is a bit more powerful. So it's been really useful for that. And as soon as you hit save on the project, it'll sync with Splice. So very, very useful in that way. And yeah, just touching on the remixes real quick, because I know you mentioned that. We've actually signed a couple of records through remix competitions in the past. And I remember, you know, setting up the project files, we put in as much as we could, as much as we wanted to give away from the original in there as well. So yeah, if you had, whether it was Ableton or FL or whatever the actual project was, like you could see all the individual tracks and in the same way. I guess it's the same if you download the stems, because we did bounce everything to audio, but it's just really nice to see it all come together as like a puzzle. You know, everything sounds kind of weird on its own, but when it's slapped together.
Yeah, I think you guys are hinting at the same thing, which is it's a really good tool for somebody who's aspiring or learning. You can deconstruct a track and see exactly what goes into it to make it sound radio ready. Okay, so I get it. So this is how we're going to collaborate. If I want to work on it, I want to save it, I want to send it to you. I can zip my project file, I can send it to the guy on something like Dropbox or Drive, or I could upload to, you know, a cloud-based solution like something like Splice, and I could use that for myself, or I could use that for collaborating between people. What if I want to collaborate in real time? I want to write a song with John, and we're both in quarantine, and we want to work on a track together. We want to be able to build out the melody. Are there any sorts of tools or software that you guys are using to be able to do that?
So I can touch on a couple, because last year around summertime, I was collaborating with an artist named Afixa, and he's back in Ontario. I'm over here in Vancouver. I actually offered to come fly down and, you know, hang out in person, but he's like, yeah, I think we can do it without that. It was kind of weird. I was like, you don't want to be with me? Okay, fine. That's cool. No, it's just like we have very different schedules. He likes to work at night. I like to, you know, work in the day, all that kind of stuff. So we kind of tested out a bunch of different solutions here. Some of them kind of more technical, some of them more kind of old school approach. Because, you know, at the most basic level, he's using FL, I'm using Ableton. So we've got a bit of a clash here. So regardless, we were bouncing to audio whenever sending stuff over, basically sending over wave files of the stems of the different channels. But there were many occasions where we wanted kind of real-time feedback when I'm working on something or he's working on something. And we tried doing, you know, a private Twitch stream that I'm tuned into. Immediately noticed there's too much latency. As soon as I'm giving feedback, he's already on to the next thing. He's like, what are you talking about? So that didn't really work well. We went over to Mixer, like Microsoft's competitor, or Microsoft's kind of streaming platform, which is a competitor to Amazon's Twitch. And they've got a lot lower latency. And that was like pretty solid, I'd have to say. But it was kind of sketchy because it technically was public. If anybody kind of jumps in, we didn't really have anything to hide. It wasn't that secretive, but that was a cool free option. But later on, we stumbled upon a thing called Listen To by a company called Audio Movers. And I think there's a free 1-week trial where they provide basically a plugin that you can put into your workstation, your digital audio workstation, that will stream the audio directly from Ableton or whatever you're using to whoever wants to listen. And we found that was really useful. We basically had that going and then had a Discord call going. You could use Zoom, you could use FaceTime, whatever. But we wanted the actual audio to come directly through, at the highest quality, the lowest latency. And that was something that we really, really enjoyed using. I don't know if you have you probably have plenty of other technologies that I've never heard of, but that's what really helped us. And then just Dropbox for passing things back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's really interesting. I remember you mentioning Listen To me when we were kind of putting this panel together, but just so I understand, you're telling me that Listen To is a VST that I can put on the master chain of my DAW, and then I can route that audio to Discord or to Twitch or to Zoom or whatever. And that's how you guys were minimizing the latency so that you could collaborate on melodies in real time and give him feedback.
Yeah, someone in the chat's also saying you can stream it through Discord. I don't know what the quality is like now. I know they've been making a bunch of improvements recently, even with like the ability to go live, which allows you to like share the screen with now up to 50 people instead of 10. So yeah, Discord's really good. There's just something nice about having the audio from the digital audio workstation coming just directly through, not being like added with your voice, and just coming through in the cleanest possible way. It just felt better. I don't know.
Absolutely.
You can probably get away with using Discord, but
yeah,
we found that this was really good.
Matt, do you have any other tricks for people who are looking to collaborate more in real time?
In real time, no, I don't. Honestly, Jonathan knocked that answer out of the park. I can't add anything there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting though, because you would think that there would be more software solutions to this, because it's not a new problem. But it really sounds like you're telling me, John, that record that you worked on with Afixa was then subsequently released on Monstercat, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a commercially released master that you guys collaborated on through the internet, through just this Listen To plugin. So I think that's pretty phenomenal for people to take away from this.
Yeah, and I know there are other artists that are using Discord like to the maximum potential. This streaming ability with what they call go live, being expanded from 10 people to 15 people max due to the pandemic. They put out a little message saying that they want to make it more accessible, kind of level the playing field, I guess, with Zoom, because Zoom's kind of been the go-to when it comes to like big hangouts. So I know that it's kind of like an underground thing, but there are some communities out there that are doing these really private live streams for a maximum of 50 people. So like artists will go on and start working on music, and up to 50 of their fans can join in at any time, can come and go. So it's a nice way to also build up your community in Twitch, in Discord, because Discord's a really cool platform for artists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've seen some of that on the Monstercat Twitch channel as well. I remember we had Trivecta on a couple of weeks ago doing making a track in an hour with recommendations from people in chat, which I thought was pretty cool. How about from a label perspective? Both of you guys work at labels, albeit one in dance music, one in more hip hop. How are you guys working with your artists? There's collaboration at the track level, there's collaboration at the composition level, but now let's talk about collaboration at the label artist level, when we're providing rounds of feedback, getting the mix and master done. Matt, I think I remember you telling me about some pretty novel technology that you guys are using at Chillhop to collaborate on the works and provide feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So one thing we have is our own custom sort of CMS where we can organize sort of the work and release flow of the 300 something artists that are affiliated with us at the moment. And, you know, it's a genre in an area where releases can sort of be completed and they can turn around pretty quickly. So to deal with that, we found one of the best ways was this CMS solution, which is in fact a cloud-based solution. So what that allows people to do is our artists can, for example, sign in and they can upload masters, which they can then receive commentary on. They can indicate which is like the final version. And, you know, we can take that to our records, for example. We can store agreements for our staff in connection with these records as well. So if I need to check on, you know, publishing splits or master splits or something like that, I can access them very quickly and easily. Or perhaps I want to know what the terms are for a certain record that we've signed. I can see that together with the actual master itself and the artist. And then we also store a bunch of other metadata, you know, the geeky stuff that we need at labels to do what we do, and as publishers, you know, to ensure that we're tracking streams and that kind of thing worldwide. But really what it's done for us is given us a really great way for the artists in many cases to interface with our team, but then sometimes their teams can jump in and that type of thing. And I won't go too deep in the weeds into this one though until Jonathan has a chance to speak.
Yeah, we have a couple different solutions that we use for different aspects of the company here. One of the cool new additions is our demo box, which we've transitioned over to Label Radar. So it's like a fully kind of CMS style solution where, you know, all the demos come in through a nice little form where the artists get to choose, you know, which section of the track is kind of the most exciting and the most important, because going through hundreds of demos a week is very, very time consuming. And that has been a point that needed to be addressed. So the demos basically are chopped down to a very small, like 30-second clip. And if you want to keep listening, you can keep listening, but it starts out kind of right at the meat of the track. So that's been really, really great for us to actually go through every single demo submission that comes through and be able to immediately initiate conversation over like private message within that solution. And also they can, the artist can see when we actually listen to the track and when we decided, you know, do we want to sign it? Do we want to pass on it? That's really cool. Internally, we're using Asana for a lot of things. It's basically like Trello or any of those other kind of board style project management solutions. We use that for very basic things, but a lot of our conversations are still, you know, phone calls and email conversations, because it's nice to have that really personal, you know, touch to the communication. But I really do like automating whatever is, you know, whatever you can automate, just to make things smooth, to make the process a lot quicker so that people get their answers, they hear back,
yeah,
and aren't waiting.
I mean, what about when we're working on, you know, you signed a demo and now you've got to go from demo to release? What are you using for that feedback process with the artist?
Well, we're using email for a lot of it. Sometimes I'll jump on phone calls as well, but yeah, it's pretty simple. We've looked at other solutions, but there's always a bit of a hesitation when looking into trying to get artists onto a platform they've never used before. It could be like if they have to make an account or whatever, you might have that wall that they're just not getting through. They're not getting past this one step, and then you're not hearing back. So we're a bit old school when it comes to feedback. But I mean, we're using Asana boards for the mastering process, for me communicating with our mastering engineer that we have. I want to say in-house, but he's in the UK, but he's like full-time with us, providing feedback and kind of mastering our tracks, offering different revisions and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we're not too high tech in that area, but we're using technology wherever, you know, we need to. And I guess technically it is cloud-based because we're storing all the files online, and we're using these boards that are all online, so we don't need to have anything specific downloaded on our computers to manage all this.
Yeah, no, it's great to confirm though that there's no hidden secret. I mean, this is,
Yeah.
it sounds really obvious, but you know, what do I do when I want to talk to somebody about their song? I pick up the phone, right? And it's sometimes the oldest technology is the best technology. I was hoping we could dig in a little bit, Matt, to the book that you've put out recently, and maybe if there are some, you know, hidden tidbits of information that you could talk about from what you discovered through that process.
Absolutely. You know, one of the discovery elements for me had to do with sort of like recognizing the true impact of Splice. You know, there was a period of time where I was certainly like making beats and that kind of thing, but I was sort of like retracted from the world and not really necessarily aware what was going on. So when I wanted to write this book, and I approached Rutledge and Focal Press about it, one thing I wanted to do was determine like, what is the impact here? You know, and I immediately found that there was like millions of producers using this technology. And, you know, there are some folks, you know, to this day, when you mention Splice, they'll be like, well, yeah, isn't that kind of like cheating or copying or whatever? Absolutely not. The creativity that is involved in working within a sample, and particularly synthesizer, although that's a little bit more clear to most people, working in a sample-based style of music well is such an incredible skill. So I really wanted to hone in on that and sort of clarify, like, what can you do with samples? What can you do with presets? And give like sort of actual case studies and how these things all come together. Just to go back to the impact though for a moment, you know, I think there's a couple key figures. As I said, at least 1 or 2 million producers are on Splice right now, which is really incredible. So if you want to be relevant in some form of music production that is electronically based, I would highly recommend jumping on that train. But also too, for musicians who may be listening that are looking for additional revenue streams, as Dan was sort of pointing to earlier, they've actually paid out, as of this year, about 25 million to musicians, according to Variety, right? So this is a significant source of revenue for our industry, for our creatives. And, you know, it's not always, even though the means to get onto to Spotify, Apple Music, and these other super influential stores it's not difficult, but it's easy to get lost in the shuffle, and sometimes it can take some time for your career to get moving. So for those who are highly musical and creative, you can look at creating sample packs and that kind of thing. That could be a potential way to bolster your revenue. So that was certainly something for me that was quite interesting. Also too, I kind of honed in on this idea. Hopefully I'm not pivoting too much, and Dan, Mr. Moderator, please rein me in if this is what's happening. But you know, I really like this idea of like conceptual collaboration, right? So for example, a producer I really like who releases on Chillhop, who I've been listening to for years before I even worked at Chillhop, is Swum. I recently had the pleasure of connecting with him in Rotterdam, I believe in October. And Swum has like a really fantastic sample pack. He's been selling it himself for quite some time, but also he's licensed these sample packs to Splice. And I can hear Swum sounds all over the place, number one. It's a very popular sample pack. Certainly I use them a lot, but I get to sort of feel like I'm collaborating with Swum. And this is what I mean by conceptual collaboration. You know, I can look at this raw creative work by like a world-class talent, and I can take that and repackage bits and pieces of it into my own work. You know, perhaps if I'm a little bit newer to this way of working, I will rely on more of his elements and more on my curational sense of how I might stick them together. Whereas perhaps when you get more advanced, you might be doing more chopping and mutating and modifying these sounds into something else. So that's a layer of collaboration that I think is highly, highly valuable, that is hard to sort of access in this day and age where there's so much music. The music industry is not very centralized, really, aside from sources like Spotify. Everything else is kind of completely decentralized. And I know for me, a big part of my sort of ability to grow and learn and develop as a musician had to do with working with people who are just better than me. Working with people, or if they weren't better, they just had seen more. They were further down the road, one of those people, for example, was Skip Prokop of Lighthouse, who was also Janis Joplin's music director. It's becoming harder and harder to find these type of musical mentors. So in the spirit of this conceptual collaboration, you can be working with awesome artists like Swum, or, even, Just Blaze has a sample pack, for example. So that's quite popular. And like that's a dimension that I think a lot of people might not actually necessarily consider.
Yeah, just really quick to add to that. If you're just starting out, like the barrier for entry is so much lower now. Like you can go on, jump into one of these curated sample packs. Like I feel like they're getting better and better with how well these packs are curated. If you just want to tinker around with the new genres, just learn how a track is made, you can jump into one pack, stay within that pack, and download loops, like drum loops, percussion loops, even synth loops, bassline loops. And at the most basic form, you can put together a track in like 6 parts. Now, you don't want to release that because that's not very creative, that people will call you out for that. Once you're at that level where you're actually putting out music, you want to chop things up. You want to get your sounds from all different sources and really put your own flavor into it. But just for learning, I think that these packs are amazing because you can use these loops and really just put together a track in no time at all.
Mm-hmm.
Just see the structure. And
yeah. Absolutely. I think the structure is really great, especially if you work in a structure dictated genre. Like the dance format is so specific, right? And so I know something for me that was always really helpful was downloading songs in the same genre that I wanted to make. And I make a lot of tech house. And so if I could download an Ilios and Variantes track and see, okay, they have an intro for 32 bars and a drop or a build and a drop and a breakdown or whatever, it just gives me a recipe or a blueprint to create something. But Matt, I think this idea of conceptual collaboration is really interesting. And something, John, I wanted to ask you is, I guess, where is that line for you as an A&R? If somebody submits something to you, how forthright do they have to be with how many samples they've used? And at what point are you saying, there's too many samples. It's not, it's not something I can put out.
Yeah, it's a really tough one because in most cases, a lot of it relies on myself and the other A&R's knowledge of what's out there. Like just by being up to date with what the trending sample packs are, you can tell if someone submits a dubstep track and all the growls and all the bass sounds are from Virtual Riot's preset pack because those are so popular on Splice. And for a genre like dubstep, it's kind of very sound design oriented. So you're kind of expecting the artist to add a bit of their own, a lot of their own flavor into it. So yeah, there have been cases where we are able to, pinpoint these things. And then other times, can slip by. It's not the end of the world. I mean, they're free to use. Mm-hmm. But it's just kind of getting to know the artist before you actually release their stuff. Like you have these conversations, you hear other songs as well, so that that they're actually like the ones creating a lot of this stuff. And yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with using samples, but it's always good to mix things up and try to add as much of your own sounds as possible.
Mm-hmm. I guess, Matt, that's totally different than the world that you guys work in. This predominantly sample-based or artificial sample-based, right, where they're creating jazz and then chopping it up and turning it into something else. How do you guys view samples when you're looking at records? Is it more about the creative use of the sample, or how do you say it's too much?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't participate too much in the selection process, but I can certainly comment a little bit on what I'm seeing. So that's definitely a big component, like lately in the Chillhop music catalog over the last year or two, we've had people doing exactly what you just said, kind of a lot of them are musicians sampling themselves, or kind of like working with musicians, or working with, libraries of guitar playing, and, somebody might, put out a bunch of guitar samples and kind of work with those. But, the further back in the Chillhop catalog you go, the more you get like a traditional, if there is such a thing, a traditional sample based kind of sound where, you know, there's a lot of found sounds from old vinyl records and things like that, from rare records, and that kind of thing. And I will say that the artists in our world tend to all work quite differently. Some are more instrumental based, but you will hear in our catalog, I think just as any other catalog in hip hop or EDM, you will hear samples from Splice here and there. And it's also what Jonathan said. It's if you're using longer loops, for example, and perhaps this is a distinction to make as well between sort of loops and one shots, but if you're using longer loops just in their pure form as is, no tuning, chopping, modifying, mixing, anything like that, people would be able to tell, but that doesn't mean like you're making bad music, you know. And I think what it comes down to is music and art is always sort of best imagined, I think, as an ecosystem, and every move within that ecosystem affects every other move. So if you know, 25 big producers this year have used a certain melodic sample that we hear coming up over and over and over again, I think it's probably the same in EDM. That's probably something we would see in Flag and not be too excited about, you know. Whereas if you know, if there are perhaps remnants or that loop has been made to be unrecognizable in some way, well then that's some, and it also sounds good, you know. It's not just about changing things for the sake of changing them. Let me clarify that. That's something I think we all need to get over in our own production practice. But if you make those modifications and it turns out to be great, then awesome. Like nobody would ever think twice about it. And perhaps we should talk a little bit about one shots too. But Jonathan, I think you want to cut in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say there's an unfortunate kind of, I guess, a downside to having all these samples out there, as well as I've seen releases come out with, you know, a vocal sample from Splice, and I knew it was a vocal sample when I signed it, and that's not a problem at all. But some fans will hear the song and be like, I've heard that vocal before. This artist ripped off this artist, and kind of make these claims that, you know, this artist is bad because they use this vocal from this artist. And then you have to now educate the fans that sampling on like exists and that Splice is a thing. And they're like, oh, okay. Like, sorry about that. But yeah, that's another reason why it's good to chop things up and rework it if possible, if it makes sense for your production. Yeah, just another thing to think about.
Mm. Guys, I think it's really, you know, this is not the direction I was planning on going today, but I kind of just ran with it because it was interesting. And I think what is really telling to me is we were talking about cloud-based collaboration. How can I work with people over the internet? And very quickly, we just went to samples. And I think what that's showing is, you know, there's not a lot of tools out there for us to be able to collaborate in real time. There's no secret. There's nothing that, you know, commercial musicians are using that maybe bedroom producers wouldn't have access to. And we're all talking about the fact that, you know, samples are probably the best way to work creatively with people in an electronic environment. I think that's really interesting. So I'd like to open up to some questions, but before we do that, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity, just if you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share as it relates to this topic before we move on to the section. So Matt, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I wanted to touch on a little bit was just as I sort of transition into some closing remarks, is there also is a big difference between also using one shots and loops. So one shots would be sort of short sounds or sound effects, quite often used to create drums and percussion parts, for instance. This is what we see when people are, I have one right here. When people are doing the, you know, the Novation kind of launch pad, or I have the Launch Key Mini here, when people are doing their finger drumming and jamming, quite often that's what they're triggering are samples of drums, and you would have to really be an audio ninja to know, like, this is the kick drum from that, and this is the snare from that. Those people exist. They totally do. I'm not that keen myself. I don't have that good of an ear. But so for anyone who's really hesitant, if you feel like, you know, cloud-based resources and sampling aren't for you because, you know, perhaps you have a sense that you need to put more into your production, well, you might as well just start with great sounds, great one shots, great kick drums, great snares, great hi-hats, and you don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel, which would be like the worst thing ever, I think, for a starting musician to also be trying to develop a sense from scratch of like, what is my sound? Well, this way you can preview all the available sounds that people are using and then make informed decisions. And then that kind of ties into my closing remark, which is, you know, my favorite thing about this is watching people's skill, especially as an educator. When I'm teaching in the classroom, for example, at Western, I love watching sort of like eyes light up, eyes and ears, when they get a hold of Splice and they finally realize, oh, wait a second. You know, everything doesn't have to come from me. I don't have to like have like the initial seed idea and make it the next thing and make the next thing and make the next thing. And why I love that is even if you were working in that older style, let's say you're entirely synthesizer based, you make your own kick drums, perhaps in Massive or something like, or whatever, you're still kind of sampling in a conceptual sense when you put your work within a genre, right? You're going to be in the very least using some grooves or chord progressions or bass lines or something like that have been used before. There really is nothing new under the sun. So for those who might be hesitant or feel like this is cheating, just also keep that in mind, that like if you're working within a genre, everything you do has already been lifted and used, you know, to use the jazz term. So I think particularly for those who are looking to collaborate under times of this sort of COVID duress where we need to be indoors and that kind of thing, but also for those who are really trying to build out their production knowledge. And then thirdly, musicians who are a little bit confused by the production landscape, and there has to be some listening today. I encounter musicians that are like this all the time. This is a really great way, in a safe way, and a way that won't make you bang your head against the wall, to really access the production side of things. And just think, if you are a guitar player or violinist or keyboard player or singer, if you can now like create a sound world around that thing that you do, like how amazing would that be? And I think this is the best entry point for that.
Yeah, I don't have that much to say. Just what I think these technologies are doing is just making things a lot easier. Just to like, it's still hard to, you know, craft your own sound and to make sure your mixes are the tightest they could be and all that kind of stuff. But in the basic like creative sense, to get your ideas down and to get those, you know, creative juices flowing, it's so much easier now with the tools that we have. And there's nothing worse than working on a track and then just getting hung up on one part because you just can't get it right, you know. And it's nice to be able to, you know, search such a wide library for just the right sounds instead of having to craft it all yourself. Now, if that's for you, that's great. If it's not, then yeah, there's so many other tools that you can use to synthesize your kicks from scratch using like, you know, your synthesizer. But yeah, just lots of great tools out there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks guys for those thoughts. You know, whenever I think about it, nobody asks the painter if they made the paint. So when we're looking at being musicians in a digital environment, I don't know if there's necessarily the reason to make everything, right? It's the collection of those sounds that make the song, and not necessarily every single song. So thanks guys. Jimmy, if you're still here, I'm gonna call you back in so we can do the Q&A.
Absolutely, yeah. Just apologize if I lag at all. I'm kind of in like a bunker down here, so let me know. I love this discussion, especially what you were saying, Matthew, about and hearing about how much revenue Splice is giving back into the artist community. That's something I didn't even know. So that's always a very positive and motivating thing to hear. And again, thank you guys for sharing your thoughts. It was a very profound exit, both of you guys. And Dan, of course. A couple questions. We'll keep it as brief as possible. Again, it might go a bit over time, but again, thanks everyone for sticking around, and thanks to the panelists. First one, with platforms like Splice, is it lossless? In the old days, for each layer added to a project, there would be a slight generation loss. Is this still an issue with the newer platforms?
No, because we're working digitally. So that's sort of the beautiful thing of the digital music paradigm, is that these sounds are built from, you know, zeros and ones, and kind of are compiled into machine language, blah 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 blah, nerd stuff. Okay, so luckily with digital audio, we're totally preserved there. But however, you know, that's sometimes becoming a way of sort of putting your imprint on things is making them analog again. So taking these sort of perfect digital sounds, running them through an analog chain, and then putting them back in your computer actually can be a really valid way, where yes, it's lossless, it's a non-linear function, as we would say in nerd speak, but at the same time, you're getting something like that's kind of cool. You know, I really like working that way myself when I can.
Yeah, of course, the guy who works at a lo-fi label would say we should run everything through analog gear.
Yeah, run it through a tape machine, make it wobble a bit. Yeah.
Never apologize for the nerd talk. That's what we're here for. This is a bit of a bigger one and kind of more anecdotal. On the subject of samples and A&R, what are your thoughts on hidden samples that then get discovered and used? For example, I have a release with over 500,000 streams, and the main vocal is a chop from what was a very obscure Splice sample. However, out of nowhere, the same vocal was used in a Skittles campaign and has millions of views on YouTube. As a music creator and a label, how do you navigate the space after the fact? Does that make, I think I did that right.
I don't really see any issue with that. I only see issues with artists hiding uncleared samples in their tracks, with a lot of like the darker, you know, house stuff. A lot of like hip hop, like rap vocals are often sampled and pitched down and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times I have to ask the artist, where's this sample from? Where's this sample from? And just be very clear that you can't do this. It's not cool to send a label a track with uncleared samples. And I'm completely going off tangent, but yeah, just don't do that.
It's a great question from Spencer here, otherwise fine. Actually, a producer I really admire personally. I don't have, I just want to just reiterate that, you know, yeah, sample clearance really sucks, what Jonathan is saying, when people hide them. But if it's, you know, and it kind of goes back to what Jonathan was saying earlier, I think. Again, I'm not an A&R, but if you're kind of using a sample that everyone knows, and here it says, you know, that you're avoiding like the cashmeres or the things in the top 10, you're probably safe. You know, subtle is safe, but also don't shy away from building your song around a sample. Perhaps you're going to be the one that takes that sample and gives it new life, you know, and you might be the one that everyone else ends up copying in the future in that sense. So I think it's fine, again, not being an A&R myself, so long as it's not just like, oh, this sounds like it's totally lifted from this song over here, you know, and knowing otherwise Fine's production myself, I think you're doing just fine.
Yeah. And I think one thing
Corny joke
about Chillhop and why, I mean, one of the many reasons why you guys are dominating that space is because most other lo-fi like channels on YouTube and labels that I don't even know if they're labels or if they're just streams that I've seen have been playing tracks that have copywritten samples in them, whereas you guys have a library of, or a catalog of tracks that are actually properly cleared. So you don't have a lot of those issues that, you know, these other tracks would have, these other channels. Yeah,
it's a huge liability. Spencer, I'm just going to jump in here because I do handle the BA at Monstercat, the business affairs. I mean, from a liability standpoint, there's nothing here that you need to be concerned about, right? Like, you used a royalty-free sample in your track. I would say it's an unfortunate coincidence because now you're saying, okay, well, there's a Skittles commercial and everyone's going to say I stole it from the Skittles commercial. If that happened to us at Monstercat, I mean, there's really no recourse, right? Because it was a royalty-free sample, so it just becomes something you chalk up to unfortunate timing. I think that you just continue to own it, continue to pump the track. I mean, if it's got 500,000 plays, that's nothing to shy away from. And so the reality of the situation is you used a sample and somebody else used a sample, and that's just how it goes. And, you know, you got to think about yourself. How about the 500 people who have used the same guitar loop that, you know, a top 10 DJ has used in their radio record that came out, you know, this year, right? So it's just sometimes these things happen, and it's just part of the game. And I think that's what motivates us as musicians to really crate dig and really make sure that we're not taking the stuff on the front page, because then you end up in those unfortunate situations.
The next one is actually, this is a cool question. Is there such a thing as online collaboration etiquette, similar to what you would have in studio or live collaboration? Such a thing as that?
I'm not really sure. I think there are a bunch of different opportunities out there, like remix contests that have, specific requirements, like submit a full track, and don't, send anything in that's half baked. Like you want to send in your final project. Other instances, I guess, like one of our artists, he's a frequent Twitch streamer, and he's got a pretty tight knit community on there, and he got, I don't know, at least 30 of his followers on Twitch to kind of sing along with this vocal guide. And then he turned it into a big like gang vocal, like a big chant in one of his tracks that came out on Monstercat. It was, I think it was Protostar Galaxies was the one. And that was really cool because, yeah, that was online collaboration. And I think it helped build that, connection with those diehard fans that would tune in every week for the stream. So yeah, it was really cool. I think, I can't recall if that one was the one that went in Rocket League or not, but I think it very well might have been one that we actually synced in Rocket League as well. So really cool opportunity for their fans.
Matt, do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I really love this question too, because, in this day and age, if your collaboration is failing or not going the way you would like, it's likely because of more interpersonal issues rather than technical ones. And this may be the first time in history. I'm thinking back to, perhaps the 90s when you would roll out a bunch of hardware synths and they all had like timing and tuning issues and all of this kind of stuff. MIDI didn't work particularly well when it was rolled out back in the day, and all of that kind of stuff. So, I think that if a collaboration is going to fail, it's going to be because of personal things. So in terms of etiquette, I would say communicate about how you're communicating. You can really bring that advice into anything, but that's where I think artist collaborations really tend to fail, is that expectations aren't met. People might not understand the way the other person is working. People might not understand the intent, and you do often have to spend some time calibrating your sense of style, your sense of language. How do you talk about music? Person A, collaborator A, and then how does collaborator B talk about music? Simply the way you talk about music can really impact a collaboration. So I would just do that. Put out your expectations in a very transparent way and communicate, and then communicate about how you're communicating.
Yeah, that's very important. If you go into a collaboration with somebody and feel like, oh, I don't really like this section, I'm going to delete that, and then you delete their work, and that was their favorite part, it could really upset them. So yeah, just have those conversations. Be like, how do you feel about me changing this or that, before you go.
Then save over somebody else. Don't delete all their work and then save over it.
He's like, I don't like any of your work. Let's start over. No, don't do that.
That's a super valid concern, right? I think a lot of us who make music, we forget sometimes how curated our own sense of style becomes, and kind of like what sort of rabbit hole you might go down as an artist. And occasionally it's tempting to think, well, of course this kind of groove is better than that one, or like, of course this is the bass that we need. Well, don't make those assumptions.
Yeah, there's no rules for collaboration, but from my experience, what I've seen work out the best is collaborations where it doesn't go back and forth a lot. Basically, an artist will create more than half of a track, and the other artist will basically finish / like remix it, and then it will go back for like final thoughts and like final little tweaks. But most of the work gets done kind of in two parts in a lot of cases that I've seen, but it doesn't have to be that way. That's just my experience.
Yeah, we got time for one more, and this is a good one. I think a nice open-ended question to kind of finish this off today. What should I look for in a great collaborator? Pretty general question, but I think that's a very basic and I think a very important question to answer off the bat.
Yeah, I think it's really important for you to know kind of what you're trying to achieve with your music. If you are, lacking in any areas, and if you need a vocalist, like I think that's like the most common form of collaboration that I see with music on Monstercat is you'll pair a producer with like a writer and a singer, or maybe the singer is the writer as well, and that's a great kind of complementing collaboration. There's usually not a lot of fighting about the actual production, because the production is usually pitched to them first, you know, without the instrumental. Or actually, it could be the other way around too. It could start with a vocal and right to that. Yeah, I think it's just important to know what you're trying to accomplish. Like if you are a small artist trying to grow, and you know, have another friend that's also, you know, trying to grow, and they're in a slightly different lane, they've got different fan base than you, then you can kind of cross your fan bases over and kind of grow together in that way. If you can work with bigger artists, obviously that's a huge step up for you as well. Like if you have the skills and you have music that is really exciting to, you know, artists that are on a different level, there might be an opportunity to collaborate with them, and that could be, you know, a big leap up for you in your career. It's just, I think it's just really important to think about what you want to get out of it, like, or what you want to see from the collaboration, basically.
Matthew, do you have any thoughts on that question as well?
I totally agree, and you know, Jonathan's far more creative than I am, so I think his answer is better. But I think, yeah, you know, just really honing in on the purpose of the collaboration is huge, and then also like understanding what types of expectations you can even set. You should set an expectation, but you should know like what is in the realm of sort of possibilities for expectations you should be setting. So, for example, you know, if you get a chance to work with somebody perhaps who is, you know, famous or semi-famous or something like that, you know, don't necessarily assume that, you know, what you're going to do is going to be a banger that makes you, you know, millions and millions. You know, perhaps they are also involved in this for another purpose. Maybe they saw something in your music that's more experimental that they want to explore themselves, you know. So kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about really communicating the expectations and that kind of thing, in addition to what I think is perhaps even more important because you need it to begin, which is what Jonathan is saying, is like, think about what the purpose is. You know, what do you want to get out of it? What do you want them to get out of it? And sort of thinking about like, what is this sort of musical gift that you're creating for the sort of hypothetical listener out there?
Yeah, it's really easy for collaborations to just fall apart if both people or everybody involved is not excited about the project anymore. So I'd say just, you know, work with people that you can kind of vibe off of and kind of work together with well, if possible. If you know somebody, like I know this is more about online, but I know a lot of times just having somebody else in the studio with you or just working with you on something can be enough motivation to just want to keep going and keep working on a track. So if you can find the right people to inspire and motivate you, then that can also be a huge, a huge help, and doesn't have to be this big kind of this big thing that helps you with your marketing of your release and whatever. It could just be just to up your mood and get you feeling creative in the studio.
Amazing. This has been a really enlightening and positive and motivating discussion, guys. I really appreciate it. I think all of us need it on a Friday, and it's challenging days, but yeah, there's a lot of joy in the world, and I think talking about these new tools and these new ways of creating music is another outlet that artists and the community can find to keep going. So with that, thank you. Very, very grateful. Dan, Matthew, Jonathan, I'm honored to have you and look forward to talking again soon. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a safe and enjoyable weekend, and see you next time.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.